What I find fascinating is that there is a sense of self-confidence that is building in the continent. We can see it at a political level with the aspirations and ambitions becoming much more pronounced. For instance, the African Union has just established an agenda called 2063 agenda that is quite ambitious, that has a very important part dedicated to culture. And I think in general, what you feel is that there is a new middle class that is appropriating more the African identity with new traits and new characteristics. And I think this is very promising because it does show that Africans are now embracing with more self-confidence their identity and their characteristics from a cultural perspective. There has been a huge growth on the creative economy that includes the production of all arts and musical and artistic manifestations. In the case of Africa, it goes all the way to cinematography because of Nollywood experiments becoming more and more globalized from Nigeria, out of Nigeria. And I think the creative economy has now been considered one of the industries of the future. And we talk more and more about creative industries because of the economic potential they offer. In the case of the United States, the country that has the best structures to respond to this new call, it's already 6% of their GDP. In Africa, we don't use enough the economic potential, and it continues to marginalize a lot of the creators and artists by confining them to informal activities. But more and more we can see the manifestations of big names and champions emerging, which is a manifestation again of the possibility of Africans becoming not just consumers of their cultural products, but also capable of exporting them to the rest of the world. Africa has always profited from its talent. It's very common for people to actually use culture as the number one entry point to identify their Africanness. The problem is that the way we consume our culture tends to be not the most modern. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that access to education, access to means of communication have been limited in the past. But with the new technologies, we are seeing leapfrogging in terms of modernizing the consumption of our culture. So the hope is that we are going to be able to integrate it fully into the formalized exchanges that exist in society. And we are going to consume it differently, not more, because we already consume a lot, but in a more modern way. I'm always very pained by the fact that we don't have really instruments and tools of policy to promote culture. We tend to folklorize the culture. I'm always very pained to see that when a dignitary arrives in an African country, you put a display of traditional dances and so on, which is a manifestation of folklore. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just an indication that we have confined most of the talented and creative contributors of our society to basically second roles. And I think this is wrong, and we need to change it. We need also to go all the way to the way we use television, radio, modern forms of communication like social media, etc., to integrate them into much more complex forms of economic integration. And I unfortunately don't see it happening in most countries. There are some good examples. Countries that have put culture up front as one of their industries and use it for tourism, use it for making sure that there is a dissemination of cultural products. And I think if you think of Nigeria, that's probably the country that has produced the most in terms of cultural industries over the last decade. There is enough progress now for its contribution to GDP to surpass even the growth in agriculture. I think it's very important for us to realize that there are 7 to 10 million young people looking for jobs at any given moment in Africa, and this number is going to grow exponentially. So we need to find ways of employing the youth. Obviously, we can talk about industrialization, which is normally the way the economists respond to the need for the creation of modern jobs in a modern economy. But the definition of industrialization does not limit itself to just manufacturing. Industrialization is industrial era types of economic relations, and that includes modernizing our transactions, and that includes also culture.